we had invited the mayor of Hanover. I don't know if any of you recall what has been going on there, but Monica Ojo has been elected the mayor of Hanover, African-American woman, the first, not elected, she was actually appointed or elected by the council. And she apparently was one of the group of African-American golfers, women golfers who were there who it seems weren't playing golf quickly enough. So they got into a good deal of trouble over not being as quick as they should be. But we asked her to come to have a discussion because it seems she has been subjected to a great deal of racial harassment, including some attacks from the resurgent KKK. But we asked her if she would come. She says no, but she did send a statement. And I'd like us to really talk about that statement. And I'll let you also. When we asked her to offer her thoughts on, what she's going through in race relations today, she says, I would think my response, and you may use this, is that racism is alive and well in the core and soul of people. It will take a major cultural shift to eradicate it, and that is problematic because shifts only come when there is an embrace of diversity and inclusion. Now, to be honest, when I heard that, or when I read it, I got a chill because this is 2019. This is not 1969. And we have a woman who's in a position of power in a city in the East Coast of the greatest power in the world, who is saying that racism is alive and well in the core and the soul of people. How do we begin? Look at all the great, this is a good beginning because this is a diverse group. How do we begin to deal with the core and soul of people?
I think that's essential, what you're just saying, in terms of trying to change people's understanding and belief systems, in terms of how people are educated. I went to integrated schools. I'm glad I did. They say Sunday is the most segregated time in the nation in terms of we come and we don't do faith together. We work together, but we don't socialize afterwards. So there's very little association, cultural association. Look at our young kids. There's no history in terms of Black History Month now is a passing theme. So I believe that culture. I think when you look at some of the what happened in Virginia, I think that was an awakening of the soul. I think that was an awakening of souls that had been asleep for quite a while. And I think that was an awakening. I think it was a wake-up call. It should be a wake-up call for everyone because we haven't seen that type of demonstration of anger and hate and violence in quite a while. But it was simmering to let you know that it hasn't gone away. It had gone beneath the surface, but it hadn't gone away. And until the generations coming up and the generations before them that are coming, that has to be taught. That has to change. That mindset, that perception, that culture, and that their beings have to change before you see massive change.
So I'm a history teacher, Jake Miller, and we have to stop sanitizing things and just tell them for their complicated selves. Like Martin Luther King just isn't a guy who stood in front of the Lincoln Memorial and gave a speech. He did a lot more than that and did a lot after that. And for a lot of schools, the story stops there. Like we say that the chapter on racism was closed, and now we just have a day to commemorate the amazing man that we all revere. But he died fighting for a lot of people's rights. He was a very complex, but also a very moving person. Similarly, Abraham Lincoln is pictured all throughout history as the great emancipator, but had a very complex association with slavery. And, depending on how you read it, you could see that he was destined to emancipate slaves or wasn't. And I think we have to teach the messy history. It's when we try to make everything nice and clean cut to put it in a box, we do all of this a disservice. It doesn't help to bring diversity to the forefront. It tries to say, like, we all just go through this square peg. And I think this is a great start. And we all are incumbent, not just history teachers, but all of us as Americans are incumbent to say that everything that Americans bring, all Americans, regardless of skin tone, is important. Otherwise, if you look just down the road in Carlisle, you're going to see a race that has almost been eradicated by an American mindset. And now they are digging up the bodies of students who were 14, which is what I teach. I teach 14-year-olds at Carlisle who were of Indian descent or Native descent or indigenous descent, and were essentially put to their death through that, through Americanizing. So I think we have to embrace the future of a diverse America, or we're doomed. I don't think history repeats itself, but I do think history rhymes a lot, and we have to stop that rhyme.
Yeah, and yet there are some people who, and then there are some people who really do take offense at what they see is, the defaming of American history. That they feel that bringing up all of this is not giving the history the reverence it deserves, right? I'm sorry, go ahead.
So I'm Ken Worthwine from York. Personally, I think there are three ways to change the culture. One is through personal education, but you have to be motivated to want to be educated. And probably when you reach a certain age group, your views may not change unless you're personally motivated. But I think we can do a lot within the schools to teach this historical importance of what has happened in our country, that we've had stolen land, stolen labor, and what that means. The other way is through personal experience. Are you willing to reach out and interact with other people who are of a different culture than you? Are you willing to move into their neighborhoods? Are you willing to socially interact with them? Are you willing to exchange, the stories of how you were raised to see the commonality you had? That can really change people quite a bit. Mm-hmm. And the last thing, we need policy, laws, rules, regulations, and that is to protect people's rights. And without that, you need all three, but without policy, people will suffer. And the best example of that is the voting suppression that has occurred within the last election, and it's going to get worse.
Mm-hmm. Yes, Brandon?
Yeah, and just to piggyback on that, and I'm Brandon Flood. So number of capacities, although I'm not here as Secretary of Board of Pardons, and I'm here as a private citizen.
As a devoted reader.
Right, and a devoted reader. But to his point, we talked about how to change minds, and I think if that's the strategy, that's a foolhardy one, because people are what their experiences are. They are what they're taught. So I think it just comes down to sheer exposure. If you're around someone, or you find yourself, oftentimes you may hear, there are any folks here, in any veterans amongst us. So as you all know, especially depending upon when you served, it was the military, sports. It was those two particular instances where you had exposure. You may have had exposure for the first time to other races, other nationalities, and you got to see firsthand. You didn't have to rely upon third-party accounts or fake news, even though it wasn't called fake news back then. But it is through exposure. Like today, actually, I went and presented before. And for anyone that's not familiar with me, I'm also a former reentrant, and I had an opportunity to present before Pennsylvania Board of Parole and Probation, their executive management. And a lot of them afterwards didn't know my story, but afterwards they had a lot to say and wanted to collaborate or have me come out to their district. So it's through that exposure. And that I think you're able to overcome some of that. Also, you talked about the mayor of Hanover. While her position is mostly ceremonious, it does come down to having more decision makers and of color. We often hear the term white privilege. There's a such thing as black privilege too, and
Tell me about
Puerto Rican privilege. So, and privilege is just having much like the name suggests, having the privilege to go before someone that looks like you, that can identify with you, and that is a decision maker and potentially can benefit you as a recipient. So, I can exercise. I've been the recipient of black privilege, and I think I can mete out some black privilege now in my current role. And then to your point about laws. If you know something, I think 1955 is when the Pennsylvania Human Relations Act was first enacted into statute. Although that agency is having its own problems still in 2019, even some internally. But knowing the law and you're able to, folks are less inclined to actively discriminate against you overtly or covertly if you are educated about the laws, and in particular anti-discrimination laws. So those three things, most of them kind of dovetail with what you said, but exposure, knowing the law, and more importantly, what was the second one? No, I didn't say education. Exposure, knowing the law. Right, and decision makers.
Decision maker, that's right. Behind you, we have your DC. Mm-hmm.
Fiordalisa White. I think what's important in the city of Harrisburg is coming together across generations. So a lot of the narrative that happens when people talk about back in the day, I just feel like I can close my eyes and it would have happened last week. There are places in the U.S. where bodies are still hanging off of trees. There are places where, people's lives are being taken because of the color of their skin or their circumstances. So at 33, sometimes I lose touch with understanding what happened back in the day because my back in the day is last week. So I think what's important is always the narrative. Words are very important, and being honest with those words and being intentional about the way that you discuss history. We see some articles where people are describing African Americans coming over willingly and, helping white people out. And that's certainly not what happened. But these are in history books. So our children are receiving misinformation consistently. So I think words are very important in how we discuss the narrative, but the generations of people that have lived through those experiences back in the day, I think, are grateful for the progress. So some of the conversation is how far we've come, and then we have people that are younger that are outraged because we haven't gone far enough. So there is that dissonance between a sense of complacency and how you're saying, back in the day it wasn't like this, you should be grateful, but still honoring the fact that we have a long way to go, and we have to still be honest, and we have to still live in a spirit of unrest and not be complacent in how we're describing our progress. Because yes, we have made progress, but if I can still at 33 understand what happened in the 60s and 70s like it happened last week with the same if not more outrage because we're still going through it, then I think that's the disconnect, is how are we discussing what happened in the past? How are we discussing what needs to happen now? And have we done our due diligence as storytellers to be able to pass down stories accurately from generation to generation? Because it is innate. We do have post-traumatic slave disorder as African Americans. We'll call it stress disorder for everyone else. But just as we pass on trauma from our ancestors, I fully believe that at the core of some white American families, you are also passing down the rage of your forefathers and the rage of, the people that have gone before you. So we have to heal from this illness. But at this point, some of us are still even scared to call it by name. So it's not about being colorblind. It's not about finding those words which make people feel comfortable in what's happening. We have to create the appropriate words and the appropriate narrative to be honest about it in order for us to call the illness what it is and then work on the cure.
So one of the things that really still baffles me, I have to be honest, because your point about association, if you get to know someone, you're around people, you really are going to see them as people, right? And yet, it's now been 50 years. We have been with each other. We have been going to school. We have been seeing each other at work. We have been playing ball with each other, right? Or whatever. But it's not gone away. Racism, you're saying, has not gone away. Why hasn't it diminished? Yeah, okay. let's hear from Stephen, and then we'll make the rounds there.
Okay. Well, down in York County, we grow our own bigots. And the idea of cultural competency can't be integrated into school because of the institutional barriers in school districts. The school boards control some of the ideas that are taught by teachers who may have values of the past and don't have any cultural competency.
So I serve in a multicultural church, which is that rare unicorn that doesn't happen on the segregated hour of the morning. And what we've learned in that congregation is that, yes, we work together. Yes, we may live in adjoining neighborhoods, but cultural competency still largely does not exist as a general rule. And so overwhelmingly, when I go into white spaces as a faith leader or an educator, and I say, what do you know about redlining? About the government saying that Black people are not allowed to purchase homes in certain neighborhoods. And it's a totally foreign phrase. When I say, tell me about eminent domain, about the government just taking chunks of land because they want to make it a nicer area or turn it into a downtown revitalization district. And it's almost always very poor white people or it's people of color whose lands are being taken by the government. And people are blown away. How many times in the media have we seen, I just didn't know that I couldn't refer to Black children as monkeys. I just didn't know that it wasn't cool for me to do blackface and then pretend to be a talk show host and do a dance act in a school board meeting. I just had no idea. Because if you ask these folks, who are your close Black friends? Who are you eating dinner with that's Hispanic? Who are you spending close personal time? Whose lives are you sharing that is actually different than you? Are you sharing adjoining desks? Or are you actually nurturing each other's children? Are you spending time together after hours? And we're still not. We have polite, nice people interactions, but we don't have the real transformative relationships, and we don't have the education and history. I cannot tell you how many white people that I know who have no idea that there is a Black national anthem, much less what it is, and to stand with respect when you hear it, because it is not your hymn from the back of a book. It is a song of freedom and liberation and a cry of lament from Black people. The basic cultural competency is missing, and that needs to be there, I would venture to say, before we say go in and have conversations and have listening sessions. Because an uninformed person that feels it's okay to go in and drop the N-word to try to be more familial, that could just make the situation worse. And I do think that's what we see. Folks that say, I want to talk, I want to chat, I want to get this off my chest, I want to be open, but they haven't availed themselves of God's gift of Google
Yes.
to educate themselves about the history of someone different than themselves before saying, well, that person should welcome me. Have you earned your welcome? Have you earned your trust through educating yourself first before expecting to have the red carpet of trust rolled out to you?
Well.
Can't follow that, huh?
No, yeah, I mean, I'm in total agreement with her. Again, you said that we have to, that we've been together for 50 years.
Yeah.
And, you know, but we've been together longer than that. But it was forced too. See, it wasn't that everybody wanted to be. Remember, they were against integration. They wanted to stay separate, and some of our people wanted to stay separate as well. You know, so being together today, that's why you have people just walk past each other because, you know, we have to do this because the law says we have to do this. But if we go back into, I know we have a history teacher here, but I'm infatuated with history myself. So if we go back a little further, him and I had a conversation about educating our own children of who they really are. Our people have a great plethora of a wealth of history that we've done. And we don't know that because they're not in our history books, you know. So I think not just studying me, I don't just study what my people did. I also study the other cultures as well. So I can see how we were under attack and who that was attacking us. So from that point, I think we were stripped of our culture completely, you know, our language completely. When we were sold and separated from our family, some of us can't even go past our grandmother to see where our heritage takes us, you know, and that in itself is a hurtful thing, to not know who your family is and who you descend from. Now we have to go to Ancestor.com and trust
Which
that
I did do. I found out.
and trust that they're doing the right thing. I don't think that they can pinpoint it. I mean, the DNA is accurate, but what are they drawing? You take my DNA, well, who are you comparing
Well,
it
it's
to?
also not the family history. It's you know where, but you don't
Right,
have
yes,
those
what I'm saying.
stories.
They can't pinpoint to you. And not only that, and I see Mr. Flood has his hand and this brother here. Another thing is that we have, again, that information is important, that our children get that, not just in society, in our homes, but in our schools. We have, and there's a conditioning, we just have to be honest. There is a conditioning that's been going on for a long time. And with the history you keep telling us that Christopher Columbus discovered America. We know for a fact that that's not true, but it's still in the books. So then we will have, you know, our counterparts to white America come to our city of Harrisburg and teach our black children this. Yeah. Are we following a curriculum, or should we be telling the truth? And I think we all need to take part in standing up against some of those things that we know that are untrue, so we can begin to heal. And again, it's an acceptance of what certain races or ethnic groups did to one another. Even us, or what we're doing to ourselves, we have to take responsibility of that as well.
Let's go to Mark, but I'm going to come back to one of your points. But go ahead, Mark.
Well, there's more than one former classroom educator in the classroom. Yours truly, Mark Smith. Pre-K through 6, and I taught math and science, and I did bring in other cultures within my curriculum as well. And I do place a high priority on the knowledge of history in general. Many of my students and their parents weren't aware of many of the inventions of people of color, African Americans. The oil pump of a car was invented by an African American. The automatic transmission was invented by an African American. The security cameras was invented by an African American female. The furnace, the oil-fired furnace, was invented by an African American female. The street light, many different other inventions. I do believe that if these accomplishments are integrated within the curriculum in all schools, public and private schools, that there would be a different understanding and a different perspective that people can actually share when speaking with each other. Thank you.
The one thing I would say is I think that we use the terms discrimination and racism or racist interchangeably, and that they aren't necessarily used in the proper context. There are some people, the definition of racism is someone who believes that they are superior, racially superior than another race. But there's white people who know that they're inferior to you that will discriminate against you. The person at Subway earlier when I came in with bow tied, and I can tell that there was something amiss with maybe because I wanted spinach instead of I modified my sandwich too much. I don't know, but so we use those terms interchangeably. I think that is problematic sometimes. Just to be frank, and it works on both sides of the coin. We're quick to cite that someone's racist. So we live in a very litigious society. You talked about not having the space to have these conversations.
Yes.
People don't feel comfortable having these conversations because there is no refuge in a lot of places because someone will bring suit against you. So I think, or grievance with you. So I think we need to be mindful of using those terms, discrimination and racism. And if you do, if there is an instance when someone may have used the N-word or feel comfortable, we talked about cultural competence or cultural incompetence. Sometimes it may come from a place willful ignorance, but in many, and I won't say many cases, but in some cases it does come from just lack of exposure.
Yeah.
So pulling someone to the side and having that conversation, as opposed to blasting it through PennLive, may get you, may get you further.
Well, one of the mistakes I think that many people make is that they don't vet themselves with different people quietly. You know, many of our politicians, they're always talking to their own kind. So it's fine to say all of this in your own kind, right? But when you're in a mixed group, that's when you run into the problem.